Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Mike Turner with iArch Solutions, and this session is called the VMware Crossroads, Your Strategy After Broadcom. We'll keep it to about 45 minutes with time for questions at the end, so drop anything you'd like covered into the chat, and as we go, I'll pick them up. If you're on this call, you've almost certainly felt what's happened over the last 2 years. Broadcom's acquisition of VMware fundamentally changed the licensing model. Perpetual licenses gone. Product bundling, core-based subscription pricing. And for a lot of organizations, that's translated into renewal quotes several times what they used to pay. Enough more that companies are looking for alternatives. So here's where we're going today. First, exactly what changed under Broadcom and how the new bundling and pricing works, the mechanics behind the increase. Second, what the market is actually doing about it, survey data on which alternatives organizations are moving to, and why KVM-based platforms come out on top. Third, we'll go deep on Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager, what it is, feature parity against VMware, and where it goes further. And fourth, the numbers. A full 3-year cost comparison on a real 100-server estate, including migration cost, so you can see the actual business case rather than a headline percentage. A quick word on posture. This isn't a session about VMware being a bad product. It isn't. It's about whether the new commercial model still fits your environment and what a credible, supported alternative looks like if it doesn't. Everything we show you today is grounded in real pricing and real deployments. Let me start with a quick word on who we are, and then we'll get straight into what changed. Okay, I'll try to keep this one short. iArch Solutions is a certified Oracle partner, and we've been doing this since 2013, and our roots are in infrastructure, not slideware. The numbers on the screen are the short version. 60 plus cloud migrations, over 300 EPM projects delivered, and 26 OCI certifications across the team. That last one matters for today's conversation. We're not a firm reading Oracle's documentation alongside you. This is what we know. The logos across the middle are representative of who trusts us with their production environments, companies like PPG, Toyota, Abbott, PNC Bank. We serve global organizations large and small, including dozens of Fortune 100 and Fortune 500. And our consultants are 100% onshore. You talk to the same engineers who are doing the work. I am Mike Turner, Director of Emerging Technologies here. I spent 27 plus years in the Oracle ecosystem, which means I've lived through enough platform transitions to be skeptical of easy answers, including the one I'm about to present to you. You'll notice I show you the migration costs, not just the license savings. And on the partner strip at the bottom, Oracle, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, Rackware, the point is we're not really just about a destination. We get paid to run environments well, not sell you a logo. So later when I tell you that Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager is a serious answer to the Broadcom problem, it's because we've costed it and built it, not because it's the only card in our hand. With that out of the way, let's talk about what changed. All right, let's take a second. Before we go further, I want to review this slide with you because it's kind of the gist of the whole session. Read it with me. Broadcom's acquisition of VMware has fundamentally changed the economics, flexibility, and risk profile of your infrastructure. In staying, puts you at the mercy of a vendor whose priorities no longer align with yours. It's a lot to take in. 3 words matter here. Economics. The cost of the same estate has moved by a multiple, not a percentage. Flexibility. You no longer buy only what you need, you buy the bundle Broadcom sells. And risk. Perpetual licenses you owned have become subscriptions you rent, which means your infrastructure now has a renewal date attached to it. And the last clause is the one that tends to land in the room. Staying put is itself a decision. It's easy to frame do nothing as the low-risk option, which it usually isn't. Doing nothing means accepting whatever the next renewal quote says on a platform whose roadmap is now set by a company optimizing for a very different customer profile than most of the people on this call. To be clear, this isn't Broadcom doing anything illegitimate. They bought an asset and they're monetizing it. The question isn't whether they're allowed to, it's whether the model they've chosen still works for your company. And for a lot of organizations, the honest answer is no, and that's what the rest of this session is about. So let's get specific about what changed. There are 3 buckets of change here, and they compound. Individually, each one is survivable. Together, they're what's driving the renewal shock people are seeing. First, the commercial model. Perpetual licenses are gone. If you own licenses, you're being converted to subscription. Products are bundled, so you buy the platform rather than the pieces you actually use. Terms are longer with support mandatory, not optional. And there are penalties if you let a renewal lapse. The net effect, what used to be a capital purchase you controlled, is now an operating commitment on Broadcom's calendar. Second, and this is the one with the biggest financial teeth, the metering unit changed from sockets to cores. Every CPU is built at a 16-core minimum, even if it's smaller, and orders now carry a 72-core floor. That means dense modern hardware, the exact servers you brought to consolidate, is now the most expensive thing in your estate. Across the customers we've worked with, renewals are landing 3 to 5 times higher, not 3 to 5%, times. And third, the ecosystem around the product changed. The partner network was cut back sharply, so a lot of organizations lost the reseller or integrator they've worked with for years. Support headcount was reduced, and pricing has been unpredictable enough that people can't plan a 3-year budget with any confidence. That last point comes up more than the cost in the conversations we have. Finance teams can absorb a number. They can't absorb an unknown. It's not just VMware got expensive. The economics changed. The unit of measure changed and the support relationship changed all at once. That combination is why this became an architecture conversation instead of a procurement one. Let's look at the price list because the core base numbers are worth seeing in full. Based on publicly published information, here's the current bundle structure and MSRP per core per year. Don't try to read every line, there's a lot here. I'm going to highlight the 3 important points. Point 1, top to bottom, the list runs from $350 a core down to $35 a core. That's a 10-fold spread. And which tier you land in is driven by less what you need than which capabilities got bundled together. VMware Cloud Foundation at $350 is the full stack. vSphere Enterprise Plus, vSAN, ARIA Suite, NSX, HCX, SDDC Manager. It's a lot of product. The question is whether you're using it. Point 2, this is the important one. Most organizations we talked to were running vSphere Enterprise Plus and vCenter, and not much else. Under the old model, you bought that. Under the new model, if you need any one component that lives in the VCF bundle, you buy the whole bundle at $350 a core. Customers routinely end up paying for NSX and ARIA and HCX they have no plans to deploy. That's not a negotiation failure. It's how the packaging is designed. And note the fine print on the cheapest tier. Essentials Plus is sold in 96-core kits with a maximum of 3 hosts. So the entry-level pricing that looks attractive is capped at a footprint most of you have already outgrown. The tiers that are affordable don't scale, and the tiers that scale aren't affordable. Hold on to that $350 figure, VCF per core per year. That's the number we'll carry into the model later in the session. To see why this hurts as much as it does, it helps to put it side by side with what you used to pay. Same product before and after. 4 rows and all 4 move against you. Rows 1 and 2 are at the core of it. The unit changed and so did the frequency. You used to license per CPU socket once and own it. Now it's per core every year. And look at the price row carefully. About $4,500 a socket then, $135 to $350 a core now. Those aren't comparable numbers. A socket is 1 unit. A modern CPU is 32, 48, or 64 cores. The unit got smaller and the meter never stops. That flips your hardware strategy on its head. 15 years of consolidate, buy denser CPUs, run fewer boxes. Now inflate your bill instead of shrinking it. The better your consolidation ratio, the worse your invoice. Run that against your own core counts and the number will speak for itself. Happy to do that exercise with anyone offline. Third, ownership became rental. Perpetual licensing meant you could skip a year of support and a tight budget and keep running. Subscription only means non-renewal isn't a savings move, it's an outage. You've lost your leverage, and Broadcom knows exactly when it comes back around. Fourth, bundles. You no longer buy what you need, you buy what's packaged. We cover the specifics on the pricing slide, but it's worth naming here because it's not a price increase, it's a model change. Unit, ownership, and packaging. All 3 moved at once in the same direction. That's why wait and see hasn't worked and why so many teams are already looking elsewhere. Okay, everything we've covered so far has been the mechanics. Pricing tables, licensing units, bundles, yada yada. This slide is what those mechanics actually add up to. 3 conditions and they don't sit side by side, they stack. An uncontrolled cost explosion. The metric moved from CPU to core, and the core minimums went up, so organizations are seeing dramatic year-over-year increases on hardware that hasn't changed. Notice the word on the graphic, uncontrolled. It isn't that the cost is high. High is manageable. You budget for high. It's that you don't control the input. Your bill is now a function of a core count formula and a bundle definition someone else revises. Loss of control and flexibility. Perpetual licenses are gone, so you're fully exposed to Broadcom's roadmap and pricing decisions. You don't own what you paid for anymore. You're renting on their terms, which means practically you've lost the one lever every infrastructure team used to have, the ability to sit still for a year. Sitting still is no longer free. And a support ecosystem decline. Support tiers were consolidated, the workforce was cut, and the partner program was restructured in a way that deprioritizes smaller and mid-market customers. Slower response, fewer escalation paths, and in many cases, the partner who knew your environment is simply no longer in the program. So your dependency went up at the same moment your support quality went down. Now put them together, and this is the point of the slide. Rising cost on its own is a budget problem. Loss of control on its own is a governance problem. Weaker support on its own is an operations problem. But all three at once on the platform that runs your production estate, that's not three problems. That's risk. Concentrated, single vendor, business continuity, risk. And this is the reframe I'd encourage you to take back to your leadership. The VMware conversation usually gets filed under cost, which means it gets handled at renewal by procurement once a year. Filed correctly, it's a risk concentration conversation, the kind of thing your board already has a framework for. You almost certainly have policies about single points of failure everywhere else in the state. This is one. And once an organization sees it as risk rather than price, the behavior changes. You stop negotiating and you start evaluating. That's exactly what the market has done over the past 2 years. So let's look at where people are actually going. If those three conditions add up to risk, the next question is what everyone else is doing about it. This isn't our opinion. It's an IX Systems community survey from February 2024. 741 VMware customers were asked which party they're evaluating. Starting at the bottom, nearly 59% are evaluating KVM-based platforms, more than triple the next option. When a market fragment's under pressure, you'd expect the responses to spread out. And this one converged, and it converged on open source KVM. We'll talk about KVM in a second. The bar I'd like to point you to is stay with VMware. At 17.8%, fewer than 1 in 5 intend to stay, which means more than 8 in 10 are actively evaluating an exit. Whatever hesitation you feel about raising this internally, you're in the majority, not out on a limb. Hyper-V and Zen are essentially tied around 12%. Both are credible, but neither is pulling away, and Hyper-V trades a Broadcom dependency for a Microsoft one. It's worth noting that trade consciously rather than by default. Two things to be straight about. Oracle isn't on this chart because OLVM is built on KVM. It's counted inside the 59% bar. The survey never broke out individual products. And this is a community survey, so the pool skews technical and open source friendly. Ask Fortune 500 CIOs, and stay with VMware would probably be higher. Directionally, though, it matches what we see in our own client base, and that's the part I'd weigh most. So the market has converged on KVM, but KVM is a technology, not a product. And the product decision is where this actually gets made. Let me caveat this before I present it. The survey doesn't name individual KVM products, so nobody can give you the true product split from that data. What we've done is take the 59% bucket and weight it by each product's relative install base. Our estimate, not a survey result, so treat it as directional. I'd still rather show it than leave the biggest bar on the last slide as an abstraction. Because KVM-based isn't something you can put on a purchase order. At some point, the decision becomes Proxmox or Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager or OpenShift. And the honest headline is that Proxmox dominates. Roughly 35% of the KVM market, or about 3 times Oracle's share. It's been around since 2008. It's good and it's cheap. If you're a small shop with strong Linux skills and no Oracle footprint, Proxmox may well be your answer. Now consider OLVM. It comes in around 10.5% of the KVM market, roughly 6% of all customers surveyed, and second among the named products. Note the timeline though. Proxmox had a 16-year head start. OLVM only arrived in 2019, and it's been taking shares since. A small number on a steeper trajectory, not a smaller number on decline. But here's the actual takeaway, and it's on the right. Oracle's advantage isn't broad market pull, it's ecosystem fit. If you're already running Oracle Database, Oracle Linux, or workloads on OCI, OLVM keeps your support contract, your licensing position, and your escalation path inside one vendor relationship. For those organizations, the market share number is close to irrelevant. The integration is the whole case. If you have no Oracle in the estate at all, I'd consider all the alternatives. Briefly on the rest. OpenShift virtualization at 7.3% is compelling if you're already committed to OpenShift, but it drags in a lot of platform if you aren't. Plain KVM with libvirt at 5.8% is the do-it-yourself path. It works, it's free, and you are the support contract. So the market went to KVM, and the product choice comes down to which ecosystem you're already in. From here, I want to spend our remaining time on Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager. And since KVM underpins every option in this chart, let's start with what KVM actually is. Every serious product on that last chart is built on the same foundation, so it's worth 2 minutes on what's underneath all of them. If you're going to bet your production estate on this, you should be comfortable with the layer everyone is standing on. KVM is the kernel-based virtual machine, and the keyword is kernel. This isn't a hypervisor installed onto Linux. It's virtualization built into the Linux kernel itself, part of the mainline code since 2007. You're not running a proprietary hypervisor layer with an OS bolted alongside of it. The operating system is the hypervisor. That architecture is where the performance comes from. Less abstraction between guest and silicon, so lower overhead and near bare metal speed, and it scales. KVM is the hypervisor behind the hyperscale clouds. AWS Nitro, Google Cloud, and OCI all run KVM-derived virtualization. So if anyone in your organization says open source isn't ready for production, the honest answer is they're almost certainly running production workloads on KVM today. The largest compute fleets on the planet are KVM fleets. Now, open source project. It lands differently in different rooms. So let's look at both sides. The upside is real. No license cost and no core count meter, the thing we've been spending 20 minutes complaining about, it simply doesn't exist here. No vendor can unilaterally change your commercial terms because nobody owns the code. And there's no lock-in by construction. Workloads are portable across any KVM platform, so you're not repeating this exercise in 5 years. The objections are equally real. I'd rather raise them than have you raise them. Who do I call at 2 a.m.? Community forums aren't an SLA. Who's accountable when there's a CVE and how fast? Do we have the in-house Linux skill, or are we trading a license bill for a headcount bill? Will my ISVs support their application on it? Those are the right questions, and it's free isn't an answer to any of them. That tension is exactly what this session is about. The answer isn't choosing between open source and enterprise support. It's getting both. Open, portable, no license meter foundation, commercial support contract with an SLA, certified hardware, security patching, and an escalation path on top. Open technology, commercial accountability. That's what Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager is. Which raises a fair question. Is Oracle just repackaging someone else's free software? No. Oracle is a long-standing Linux kernel contributor, and OLVM is built on the open source OVORT project, which Oracle joined and contributes to rather than fork and walk away. Red Hat, who lead OVORT and compete with Oracle directly, publicly welcomed them into that community and called OLVM a validation of the project's work. When your competitor says that about you, it's worth more than anything in the marketing deck. And Oracle runs its cloud on KVM, OCI's entire compute fleet. They're not a passenger on this technology. The code is hardened at hyperscale before it reaches your data center. So proven foundation, no license meter, and a vendor with real skin in the game. Let's look at what Oracle builds on top of it. So that's the foundation. KVM in the kernel running the world's largest clouds. Now what does Oracle actually build on top of it, and why should you trust it? Well, I want to answer that second question in a very specific way. Not with a feature list and not with customer logos, with one test. The test is, does the vendor run their own business on it? Because there is a category of enterprise software that vendors sell but don't personally depend on. If it breaks, it's your outage, not theirs. And then there's a much smaller category where the vendor's own revenue stops if the product stops. OLVM is in this second category, and everything else on this slide is evidence for that. OCI, Oracle's public cloud, the business they are betting the company on, competing with AWS and Azure, runs on Oracle Linux KVM. Every customer VM, every availability domain, every SLA Oracle signs with its own cloud customers. That is not a proof of concept. That is the single largest thing Oracle owns running on this technology. Oracle's own corporate IT, their internal business systems, the things that run Oracle as a company sit on this stack. So when there's a kernel regression or a live migration bug, Oracle's own operations team feels it before you do. This is the one I find most persuasive, and it's easy to skip past. Oracle's own engineering organization builds and tests its product portfolio on Oracle Linux KVM, which means the database, EBS, EPM, Fusion middleware, the software many of you are running today was developed and regression tested on this hypervisor. So the certification question people always ask, will Oracle support my database on OLVM, has a slightly funny answer. It's where they wrote it. In engineered systems, Exadata, private cloud, appliance, ODA, Oracle's premium hardware, the machines they sell as the highest performance way to run their database use KVM virtualization. When Oracle needs maximum performance from their own silicon, this is what they reach for, not a compromise for the low end. And underneath all of it, they're upstream. Oracle contributes to the Linux kernel and to the overt project that OLVM is built on, rather than forking it and walking it away. So this is not a vendor packaging someone else's work. They're helping build the thing they depend on. Put those 5 together and notice what they add up to. Oracle's cloud, Oracle's corporate IT, Oracle's development environment, their flagship hardware, and upstream engineering. There is no meaningful part of Oracle's own business that this platform isn't underneath. So the question, is OLVM enterprise grade? Answers itself. If it failed, Oracle's cloud revenue, their internal operations, and their engineering pipeline all fail with it. They cannot afford for this to be second rate, and that guarantee is structural, not contractual. And once you've established that, the customer references land differently. Global banks, some of the most regulated, most audited, most change-averse IT estates in the world, are running it. Large retail enterprises, where an outage and on peak trading day is measured in millions per hour, these are organizations that do not adopt hypervisor because it's inexpensive. Which brings me to the quote at the top. The most cost-efficient and stable virtualization alternative to VMware. I want to be careful with here. That's a customer's words, not a benchmark, and I'd never ask you to buy on a testimonial. But note the pairing, cost-efficient and stable. Usually in infrastructure, you're asked to trade one for the other, and the reason you don't have to here is everything on the bottom half of this slide. Now the fair pushback. Oracle uses their own product? Of course they do. That's just dog fooding. Every vendor claims it. 2 responses. First, it's checkable. OCI's architecture is public, Exadata documentation is public, the overt commit history is public. And second, more to the point, ask the same question of the platform you're leaving. Does your current hypervisor vendor run their own revenue-critical cloud on the same build you're licensed for? For most enterprise software, the honest answer is no. So the trust question is settled. Oracle runs their business on this. Let's get concrete about what you'd actually be getting and how it maps to what you have in VMware today. We've just established that Oracle runs their own cloud, their own corporate IT, engineering, and their own flagship hardware on this platform. Fair enough, but that's trust by reputation. The next question is the practical one, and it's the one your virtualization team will ask within about 30 seconds of you raising this internally. What does it look like to run? So let's stop talking about Oracle and start looking at the product. On the left is the OLVM administration portal. Data centers, clusters, hosts, storage domain, virtual machines, CPU, memory and storage utilization across the estate, a single pane of glass to manage everything. If you handed this to a vCenter administrator with no training, they would find their way around it in an afternoon. The mental model is the same. You're managing clusters of hosts, VMs live on shared storage, and you set policies at the cluster level. Same concepts, different logo. That matters more than it sounds. A big part of the perceived cost of leaving VMware is retraining and lost productivity. The fear that your team becomes junior overnight. What this screen tells you is that you're not asking them to learn virtualization again. You're asking them to learn a different console for the virtualization they already know. That's days, not quarters. Keep that in mind when we get to the TCO slide, because it's why the retraining line item there is so small. In the middle is the architecture, and it's deliberately simple. The manager, or the engine, is the control plane. Underneath it, Oracle Linux KVM hosts do the work of running virtual machines. That's it. One management layer, a pool of hosts. Same shape as vCenter and an EXI cluster. There's no exotic new concept to absorb, no re-architecting of how you think about the estate. In the bottom left is the answer to the question nobody asks out loud. Is this a small business product, or can it scale? Well, 1,024 compute hosts and 10,000 virtual machines in a single engine? I'd encourage everyone to do the arithmetic against your own estate right now. For the overwhelming majority of organizations on this call, you would run your entire global footprint inside one OLVM instance and still have most of the headroom unused. Scale is genuinely not the constraint. And the right column is, in my experience, where the actual objection lives. When people say we can't move off VMware, 9 times out of 10, they don't mean the hypervisor. What they mean is the long tail of workloads. Oracle Linux, obviously, Red Hat 7 through 10, CentOS, Rocky and Alma Linux for everyone who got displaced by CentOS end of life, SLES, Ubuntu, Solaris x86, which matters if you have older Sun Era workloads nobody wants to touch, all supported out of the box. And if it's on another OS, alternative migration steps can be planned during the migration planning phase. What about Windows? I call this one out deliberately because there's a lingering assumption that an open source Linux hypervisor is a Linux-only hypervisor. It isn't. Windows Server 2016, 2019, 2022, and 2025, plus Windows desktops 8 through 11 for VDI, fully supported guests with para-virtualized drivers. The SQL Server estate, the Active Directory domain controllers, the file servers, the line of business Windows apps, they all come across. If Windows was going to be your reason for not to do this, it isn't one. So familiar console, familiar architecture, more scale than you need, and a guest OS list that almost certainly covers everything you run today. The honest summary of this slide is there's nothing surprising here. And for infrastructure, boring is the highest compliment. Now, it looks familiar isn't the same as, does it do everything? The next question is always about the features you actually depend on day to day, the ones that would ruin your week if they were missing. So let's go through them one at a time. Familiar console, familiar architecture, and your guest operating systems covered. What about functionality? Does it do the things you rely on? Not the feature list on a data sheet, but the specific capabilities that if they were missing would end the conversation. So here's that list side by side with vSphere. And I'll be honest, this is not a subtle slide. There's a column of yes, and next to it another column of yes. The subtitle says it, yes, OLVM does that. But I don't want to just wave at the table because each of these rows is somebody's veto. So let's look at them properly. Live snapshots. Quiesced point-in-time copies of a running VM, no downtime. Well, that's your Patch Tuesday safety net, and it works the way you expect. Live migration, move a running VM between hosts with no interruption to the guest. That's the one that lets you do host maintenance in business hours, and it's the single feature people are most afraid of losing. It's there, and it's the same operational pattern you use today. Live storage migration is the one I draw attention to because it's often the differentiator people don't expect. Move a running VM's disk between storage domains, array refresh, tier rebalancing, retiring a SAN, all with the workload up. If you've ever planned a storage migration weekend, you know what that's worth. VM high availability, the host dies, the affected VMs are automatically restarted on a surviving host in the cluster. Same contract as vSphere HA. It's a restart, not a continuous uptime guarantee, and I'd be careful to describe it accurately to your application owners. But the automatic recovery behavior your runbooks assume is there. Then the two DR rows, and it's worth noting both are ticked. Active passive is the classic warm second site you fail over to. Active is both sites carrying live workload. A lot of people assume an open source based platform tops out at basic replication. It doesn't. Whichever DR posture your business continuity plan already specifies, you can keep it. You are not rewriting your BCDR strategy as a side effect of this migration. Scheduling policies, your DRS equivalent. Automated placement and balancing across the cluster based on load, plus affinity, and anti-affinity rules so your clustered application nodes don't quietly end up on the same physical host. That's the row that keeps your architecture assumptions valid. And role-based access with granular user-level controls. This is the compliance row. When your auditor asks who can power off a production VM, you have the same answer then as you have today. For regulated environments, this is frequently the first question asked and the one that stops projects. Now a caveat. I want to offer this up unprompted because a table of all yes invites suspicion. Feature parity is not feature identity. The capabilities are equivalent. The implementations and the terminology differ. And there's all corners of the vSphere ecosystem, like NSX level network virtualization, certain vSAN behaviors, some third-party tooling that integrates directly with vCenter APIs. You'd be looking at a different approach rather than a like-for-like swap. Those are the areas we'd examine specifically in an assessment. What this table says accurately is that the core virtualization platform your operations depend on is covered, which reframes the whole decision. If the capabilities are equivalent, then you're not choosing between a better platform and a worse one. You're choosing between two platforms that do the same job. One metered per core with pricing you don't control, and one that isn't. At that point, the question stops being technical and becomes purely commercial, which is exactly where I want to go next. Let's talk about what this costs. This slide is the commercial case in one view. Same hardware, same scale, 3 licensing models. The punchline is at the top. Oracle Linux Virtualization comes in dramatically cheaper than either Broadcom tier. Let's walk the setup. Every column assumes an identical server spec, 2 CPUs, 48 cores each, which means 96 cores per server. The middle columns show cost per server per year and then the same math at 100 servers. All pricing is published 2025 list pricing publicly available. Oracle's the top row. The license itself, $0. You pay support only at $24.99 per CPU pair. That's $24.99 per server, or roughly $249.9 a year across 100 servers. And that single line covers everything OLVM, the KVM hypervisor, the Oracle Linux guest OS, plus cloud native environment for workloads like Kubernetes and Ansible automation. Broadcom's mid-tier vSphere Foundation is $135 per core. At 96 cores, that's $12,960 per server, or $1.3 million at scale, 5 times Oracle. For that price, you get vSphere Enterprise Plus, Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, and ARIA Standard. Looking at top tier Cloud Foundation is $350 per core, which is $33,600 per server, or $3.36 million a year at 100 servers. 13 times Oracle's price. You do get more in the box than vSphere Foundation, like vSAN Enterprise, NSX, HCX, SDDC Manager. The question is whether you use enough of it to justify a 13-fold premium. The decision isn't really about features. It's about whether the VCF stack earns $3 million a year. For most of our estate, it doesn't. The next slide breaks the switching cost down so you can see how fast that gap pays back the migration. This is the 3-year cost picture for the same estate. 100 servers, 2 CPUs each, 48 cores per server. Over 100 servers, that's 9,600 cores. Same hardware, same workloads. For the migration estimate, the assumption is 1,000 virtual machines. The only variable is the virtualization and the support stack, and I've built this to be pessimistic on purpose, which I'll come back to. On the left, VMware Cloud Foundation is licensed per core at $350 per core per year. At 9,600 cores, that's $3.36 million a year. $10.8 million over 3 years. No migration line, no retraining line, because we're already there. That's the run rate we're locked into if we do nothing, and it's the number that goes up at every renewal. On the right, OLVM is supported per CPU pair at $24.99 per pair. With 100 pairs, that's $249,900 a year, about $750,000 across the 3 years. Then $1.8 million for migration and professional services, and $12,000 for staff retraining, both one time. And then the fifth row, which is the one I actually want to talk about because most vendor TCO slides don't have it. $3.36 million for a 12-month VMware parallel run. Here's what that is. You don't migrate 1,000 hosts over a weekend. You build a new platform, you move workloads in waves. And while you're doing that, you're still paying VMware for everything you haven't moved yet. So we've assumed a full extra year of VMware licensing at list on top of everything else. Why do we include it? We put that row in because it's the first thing a good CFO or a good procurement lead would ask for. And I'd rather hand it to you than have it discovered. If you take the disk deck internally and someone finds an omitted cost, the whole model loses trust. If the awkward number is already on the slide, the model gains it. So the 3-year total on the right, $5.92 million, fully loaded. Even carrying a $1.8 million migration, a high number, really driven more by VMware quantity, not the hypervisor architecture, and a full year of double paying VMware, you still save $4.16 million over 3 years. And notice this is deliberately harsh. We've assumed you pay full VMware costs for 12 months, while also paying full OLVM support for all 100 pairs from day one. In a real phased migration, those two curves cross over gradually, and the number comes out better than this. Break even is 20 months, and I want to address that directly because it's a bigger number than you'll see on most slides of this kind. That's the honest cost of including the parallel run. But look at what sits underneath it. Once you're through, licensing and support drop from $3.36 million a year to $249,900. That's $3.11 million of recurring saving every year. From $350 per core to roughly $26 per core on average, a 13-fold reduction. 20 months to unlock a permanent $3.1 million annual reduction is a straightforward investment case. And unlike the VMware line, it doesn't reprice on you. And if 3 years feels like an arbitrary window, it is. Run it to 5 years, and the gap is roughly $10.4 million, because after years 4 and 5 are pure recurring savings with no one-time cost left in them. The 3-year view is the conservative framing, not the flattering one. 2 more things I'd flag rather than wait to be asked. First, migration at $1.8 million is over $18,000 a server. That's mid-range professional services-led migration of this size, not a low ball. And even if it overran by half, break-even moves to roughly 24 months, and you still save $3.3 million. Second, there are costs no slide can size generically. Backup and DR tooling may reprice on a hypervisor change, and you may need landing zone hardware. These are assessment questions, and we'd scope them properly before anyone signs anything. So the cost case survives a deliberately pessimistic model, which means the decision isn't really about the money. It's about whether the migration can be executed safely. One more slide on the value side, because for some of you, it changes the arithmetic we just looked at. Everything up to now has been a parity argument. OLVM does what vSphere does for a fraction of the cost. This is the other half. 2 things OLVM gives you that VMware simply cannot. And for some of you, the second is worth more than the entire license savings. First, K-Splice. 0 downtime kernel patching. A critical Linux vulnerability lands, and K-Splice applies the fix to the running kernel in memory, effective immediately. No reboot, no maintenance window, no draining the host and migrating everything off of it first. Think about what your patch cycle costs you today. Change windows, negotiating with application owners, rolling hosts one at a time, all out of hours. On a 100-host estate, that's weeks of elapsed calendar time every quarter. But the sharper argument isn't convenience, it's exposure. Organizations don't run unpatched kernels out of negligence. They run them because the maintenance window is expensive and hard to get, so patching slips. The gap between a fix exists and the fix is deployed is where breaches happen, and K-Splice closes it. If you have a CISO or an auditor in the approval chain, this is a slide that speaks to them, not the cost slide. Second, hard partitioning, the most commercially significant item in this deck for anyone running Oracle software. If you run Oracle database on a VMware cluster today, Oracle doesn't recognize VMware as a hard partitioning technology. A VMware can move anywhere in the cluster, so the licensable footprint is the whole cluster, not the host it sits on. A single database VM can oblige you to license far more cores than the workload will ever touch. On Oracle Linux KVM, you pin vCPUs to specific physical cores, and Oracle's own partitioning policy recognizes that as approved hard partitioning. You license the cores the workload is bound to, not every core it could theoretically reach, and that exists for one reason. The hypervisor vendor and the application vendor are the same company. VMware cannot deliver that outcome no matter how good the product is because Oracle writes those rules. For a serious Oracle estate, this saving can exceed the hypervisor saving. The database license is usually the bigger line item by a wide margin. Now the caveat, and please hear it clearly, Oracle's partitioning policy document is explicitly non-contractual. The approved configuration has specific requirements and your entitlement depends on your own agreements. Nobody should build a business case on this slide from a webinar. But if you run Oracle workloads on VMware today, this is worth a proper licensing review, and the number that comes back is frequently large enough to change the decision on its own. So you don't just get the same capability for less money, you get zero downtime patching VMware has no equivalent for, and a licensing position on Oracle workloads it structurally cannot offer. Which brings us to the question I promised you. How do you actually get there? So the dollars work, the features are there, and there are two things you can only get on this platform, which leaves the question I've been deferring, how do you actually get from here to there without breaking anything? We like 5 stages top to bottom. Notice the shape before the detail. Commitment ramps up gradually, and every stage exists to take a specific risk off the table before the next one starts. We start with an assessment, a full VM inventory, and most organizations find something here because the estate is rarely what the CMDB thinks it is. We map your architecture requirements, storage, networking, DR posture, and the workloads needing special handling. Then a cost comparison on your actual core counts, your renewal date, your Oracle licensing position. Everything I showed you earlier was a model, and this is your number. Stage 2 is build. Architecture design, then a pilot environment, and a proof of concept. And this is where skepticism goes to get resolved. We stand up a sandbox OLVM environment, demonstrate the migration process, and run your VMs on your site, not our lab. Pick your awkward workloads, the one with the odd storage layout that everybody's nervous about. If that comes through cleanly, the internal objections tend to evaporate. Then planning. Every VM categorized by complexity, criticality, and dependency, because a print server and a clustered database don't move the same way. The estate splits into waves, so you're working in controlled increments rather than one heroic weekend. Storage migration is planned separately, it's usually the long pole, and cutover planning, sequencing, rollback criteria, and who makes the go-no-go call. This is also where the parallel run window gets sized for your estate. Next is execution. We build and configure OLVM, migrate in the phased waves we planned, handle the storage migration, and provide hands-on cutover support during each window. Note the word phased. At no point is your entire state in flight. Each wave lands and is validated before the next one starts, and every wave has a way back. The last row is the one people underestimate, so let me be explicit. Day 2 support. The platform is only as good as who's behind it at 3 a.m. Decommissioning. This is how you actually stop paying VMware. An estate that's migrated but not formally decommissioned is an estate you're still licensing, and that's a common and expensive mistake. Disaster recovery. Implemented and tested rather than assumed. And lifecycle management, patching, upgrades, capacity planning, ongoing. So assess before you commit. Prove it on your own workloads before you plan. Plan before you move. Move in waves, not in one go. And have someone accountable afterwards. So the practical next step is stage 1. It's an investment, but a small one, measured against the renewal it's testing. And useful either way. If the number doesn't justify moving, you have documented evidence for your own renewal conversation with Broadcom. If it does, you'll know it on your own figures. And that's the path. Let me close with one thought before we go to questions. In technology, change isn't a disruption, it's an invitation. The organizations that recognize a shift in the landscape and act on it don't just stay relevant, they set the pace. I've spent the last 50 minutes talking about a licensing change, and I want to end somewhere different because the honest truth is that nobody in the room woke up this morning wanting a virtualization project. This was done to you. Broadcom changed the terms, and the natural response to something being done to you is to feel cornered, to treat it as damage to be minimized at the next renewal. But look at what happens if you take it seriously. You take $7 million of recurring cost out of the runway and put it somewhere that generates value. You move off a metered license onto a platform where nobody can reprice you unilaterally. You get zero downtime patching, and for Oracle states in the room, a licensing position VMware structurally cannot give you. None of those would have been on your roadmap this year. The forced conversation is what resurfaced them. So what have we covered? The economics have fundamentally changed, and doing nothing is itself a decision with a price tag. The market is moving. More than 8 in 10 VMware customers are evaluating alternatives, and they've converged on KVM. And OLVM is a mature, enterprise-proven platform that Oracle trusts enough to run its own cloud, its own business, and its own engineering on, with a fully loaded cost case that survives even a deliberately pessimistic model. If you remember one thing, it's that the renewal date is not the decision point. The decision point is now, because a phased migration takes months, and the only bad version of this is the one you start too late and have to rush. Every month of delay is a month of paying the old number, and a month less runway to do this calmly. And the ask is unchanged, and it's deliberately small. Let us run the assessment. Your cores, your renewal date, your Oracle position, your number. No large commitment attached, and you end up better informed whichever way you decide, including if you decide to stay and negotiate. That's what I had. My team and I are here, and I'd rather generally spend the remaining time on your questions on more slides, so let's open it up. If you'd rather not ask in front of the group, drop it in the chat, or contact details are on the next slide, and we'll follow up individually.